The conquest of Iberia by the Umayyad Caliphate was not simply a military endeavor. It was a meeting of civilizations, a collision of worlds that gave rise to one of history's most transformative eras. This was a tale of ambition and opportunity, of visionaries and warriors who crossed borders to reshape the future. At its center stood Tariq ibn Ziyad, a commander whose courage and leadership would alter the course of history. It was a moment of profound change, where fragility of a divided kingdom met the resolve of a rising power. And in this collision, a civilization whose cultural and intellectual achievements would echo across centuries. The Visigothic kingdom of Iberia, an empire born from the ashes of Rome. For centuries, it flourished, blending Germanic traditions with the grandeur of Hispano-Roman civilization. At its peak, Toledo emerged as a beacon of politics, religion, and culture. But by the dawn of the 8th century, cracks began to appear. Years of political infighting and social unrest had eroded its foundations. And the death of King Witiza in 710 unleashed a storm of chaos. Two rivals, Roderick and Aquila, vied for control, plunging the kingdom into civil war. Loyalties fractured, and the once mighty Visigothic realm was left vulnerable, its enemies circling like wolves, sensing weakness. Across the Mediterranean, the Umayyad Caliphate was on the rise, stretching from the Arabian Peninsula to the vast expanse of North Africa. It was an empire united under faith and fueled by ambition. The Berbers, forged by the rugged landscapes of Maghrib, were no ordinary fighters. Their resilience, their adaptability, and their knowledge of the terrain made them an indispensable force. And now, their sights were set on Iberia. In April 711, a small fleet set sail from the shores of North Africa, carrying a force of 7,000 men, led by Tariq ibn Ziyad. Among them were Berbers cavalry, Arab commanders, and African warriors, a diverse army united by faith and the promise of opportunity. As they crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, they entered the unknown. These waters, long seen as a boundary between worlds, now became a bridge to a new destiny. Legend tells us that upon landing, Tariq gave a speech etched into history. "The sea," he said, "is behind you, and the enemy is before you. There is no retreat, only victory or death." To drive the point home, he ordered burning of his ships. With no escape, his men had no choice but to fight. Tariq's success was not built on brute force alone. He understood the importance of alliances. As his forces advanced, they found allies among discontented peoples of Iberia. The Jewish communities, long oppressed under Visigothic rule, opened their gates to Tariq's army. For them, the arrival of Muslims represented liberation from decades of persecution. The dhimmi system, offering protection and freedom of worship in exchange for attacks, stood in a stark contrast to the harsh policies of Visigoths. By the time Tariq reached Toledo, the Visigothic capital, much of Iberia had already been subdued. The Battle of Guadalupe, fought in July 711, was no ordinary conflict. This was a battle that would decide the fate of an entire kingdom, a clash of ambition, strategy, and sheer will. On one side stood Tariq ibn Ziyad, commanding an army of 7,000 warriors. On the other, King Roderick led a force believed to be twice as large, with heavy infantry and seasoned cavalry. But as history often teaches, numbers alone do not win battles. The battlefield stretched across the fertile plains near the Guadalupe River, where waterways carved natural boundaries and the humid air hung thick with tension. Tariq knew his army could not endure a prolonged fight against such overwhelming odds. so he turned to strategy. His Berber cavalry, lightly armored but swift, launched probing attacks at the Visigoth front lines. These feints were not designed to win outright, but to create confusion. The heavy, sluggish infantry of the Visigoths struggled to keep up as Tariq's cavalry darted in and out of range, pulling sections of Roderic's army into marshy terrain along riverbank. There, the cumbersome armor of the Visigoths became a liability. And yet, the true weakness of Roderic's army was not their mobility, it was their disunity. These forces were plagued by internal rivalries. Key nobles, distrustful of their king, withheld their full support. Some even withdrew from the battlefield at critical moments, leaving entire flanks exposed. Tariq, sensing the shift, seized his opportunity. With precision timing, he unleashed a devastating flanking maneuver. His cavalry swept around the exposed sides of the Visigoths' army, cutting off entire sections and trapping them in chaos. Meanwhile, these infantry pressed the center, their cohesion and discipline overwhelming the scattered Visigoths. And there, at the heart of the battlefield, stood Roderick, atop a white horse, desperately trying to rally his troops. But his presence, rather than inspiring confidence, only deepened the despair of his men. The sight of their king struggling amidst the chaos symbolized the fragility of their cause. As the Visigoths' lines collapsed, Roderick himself disappeared. Some say he drowned while attempting to flee across the river. Others claim he was struck down in the melee. Whatever his fate, his absence sealed the fate of his army. By the day's end, the battlefield was littered with the remnants of shattered kingdom. Thousands lay dead or captured. Tariq's victory at Guadalupe was not merely a military triumph, it was a psychological blow. The backbone of the Visigothic kingdom was broken, and the road to Iberia lay wide open for the Umayyad advance. By 713, the Umayyad forces had swept through much of Iberia, capturing cities with startling speed. But in the western heart of the land, the city of Merida stood defiant. Unlike other towns, Merida refused to submit. Its thick walls and determined defenders turned it into a bastion of resistance against the advancing Muslim army. Led by Musa ibn Nusayr and reinforced by Tariq's forces, the Umayyad army faced its most formidable challenge there. For months, the siege dragged on. The defenders of Merida, well supplied and resolute, repelled wave after wave of assaults. The city's walls stood unbroken, its people unyielding. Musa, recognizing the futility of direct attacks, shifted his strategy. Instead of battering the walls, he decided to starve the city into submission. The surrounding countryside was stripped of supplies and all routes into Merida were blockaded. While the defenders grew weaker, Musa's engineers worked tirelessly. Siege engines to batter the walls and dug tunnels to undermine the city's foundations. The slow, grinding war of attrition began to take its toll on Merida. Inside the city, food supplies dwindled, morale wavered. The once proud defenders faced starvation and despair. In a desperate bid to break the siege, they launched a daring sally, an attempt to strike the Muslim forces by surprise. But Musa, ever the strategist, anticipated their move. His troops, prepared and disciplined, repelled the attack with ease. Capitalizing on the momentum, the Umayyad forces pressed their advance, breaching the weakened walls of Merida. The city fell. Its proud defenders, exhausted and leaderless, had no choice but to surrender. The fall of Merida marked a turning point. It secured Umayyad control over the western regions of Iberia and sent a clear message to other cities. Resistance was futile. Yet even in victory, the Umayyads displayed pragmatism. Those who surrendered were allowed to retain their lives and property. In exchange, they paid jizya tax and recognized Muslim rule. The balance of military strength and diplomatic leniency was a hallmark of Umayyad conquest strategy that allowed them to consolidate their hold over Iberia with remarkable speed. The conquest of Iberia was more than a series of battles. It was a transformation of land, of culture, and history itself. From the decisive clash at Guadalupe to the grueling siege of Merida, the Umayyads demonstrated not just their military prowess, but their ability to adapt, to strategize, and to govern. Yet these battles also remind us the human cost of conquest. Behind every victory lies a story of loss, resilience, and survival. The legacy of these moments is not just one of triumph, but one of complexity, where the lines between conqueror and conquered blur, and where history is written not only by the victors, but by those who endured. The conquest was a turning point. It reshaped the Mediterranean world, influencing art, science, and governance for centuries. But it also serves as a reminder. History is rarely simple. The story of Al-Andalus is one of both unity and division, of flourishing cultures and bitter rivalries. History, after all, is not just the story of the past, it is a mirror reflecting the possibilities of coexistence, adaptation, and renewal in every age.